Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoyed this story. Tonight, let the gentle winds of Middle-earth carry you far away. This is a tale of ancient rings, of elves whose light once held the world in balance, and of a quiet farewell to a fading age. The stars are high, the world is calm, and your only task now is to listen, breathe deeply, and let go of the day. As you lie down, eyes growing heavy, you'll walk alongside Elring beneath the trees of Rivendell, hear the whisper of Lorien's golden leaves, feel the last ship rocking gently on the waves. This is not a tale of war, nor of battle cries. It is a story of quiet choices, of grace and letting go, and of peace found at the edge of the world. So snuggle in, take a deep breath, and let the journey begin. Just like the soft whisper of a lullaby. A breeze stirred the golden leaves that had not yet fallen, rustling them with the lightest of touches. The trees, ancient and wise, stood in silent vigil, their bark holding memories of ages long past. The world was hushed, as if holding its breath before some distant change. Elrin half-elven sat beneath one of the oldest trees near the edge of the courtyard, cloaked in a robe of deep blue, his dark hair falling softly over his shoulders. He watched the stars without urgency, as one who had seen many nights such as this, yet never ceased to find wonder in their constancy. On his finger, Vilya, the ring of air, glimmered faintly, a sapphire embedded in a delicate band of gold. It pulsed now and then, not with fire or fury, but with the steady rhythm of something ancient and enduring. He could feel it, a tension in the wind, a tremor beneath the peaceful soil. Sauron's shadow, though far away in the east, had begun to stretch again across the lands. Whispers of his servants gathering in secret corners of the world had reached even Rivendell, carried on the wings of birds, or woven into the melodies of wandering minstrels who did not know the truths they sang. But here, tonight, all was still. The valley was safe, for now, and the stars remained above him like old friends. Elrin closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered a time, long ago, when he had first received Vilya from Gil-galad, his king and kin, in the waning days of the Second Age. Back then, the ring had seemed brighter, or perhaps he had been younger, more hopeful, and less weary. It was not a weapon, Vilya. It was a preserver, a guardian against decay. With it, Elrin had kept Rivendell hidden, safe, and beautiful through centuries of subtle threat. Flowers bloomed longer here, the seasons turned with more gentleness, and time seemed less harsh. Yet he knew such magic could not hold forever. A quiet step behind him stirred him gently from his reverie. It was Arister, one of his oldest counselors, who bowed slightly before speaking. "My lord, the east wind bears a new scent," Arister said softly, as though not wanting to disturb the stillness. "It may be nothing, yet it does not feel like nothing." Elrond opened his eyes again, his gaze returning to the sky. "Few things are truly nothing," he said with a faint smile. "Even the smallest rustle can herald a storm." He stood slowly, robes rustling like leaves in the wind. Together, the two walked back toward the house of Elrond, their steps measured and slow. Lights glowed from within, soft lanterns lit with a gentle flame that did not flicker or smoke. The halls of Rivendell never knew harshness. The beauty here was quiet, and the walls were shaped with care. Songs drifted faintly through the corridors, though the voices had dimmed as most now slept. Before parting, Elren placed a hand on Arister's shoulder. Let the watch be doubled near the borders for the next few days. Quietly. Let no one feel alarmed. Arister bowed again and left with a silent nod. Elren remained still for a time, his fingers touching the edge of Vilya. The ring was warm tonight, responding to his thoughts perhaps, or to the thoughts of something else, far away. In his study, a fire was kept low in the hearth. Books lined the tall shelves, tales of ancient days, of Numenor's rise and fall, of battles fought beneath stars that had now changed in the sky. Elren moved to the desk where maps were laid out, some old enough to show kingdoms that no longer existed, and some newer, updated by the rangers who still traveled far and wide. His eyes lingered on the mountains in the east. Dol Guldur had grown quiet for many years, but that silence had never sat easy in his heart. He poured himself a small cup of herbal tea, the steam curling into the air like a sigh. The scent was of chamomile and athelas, calming and clean. He sipped it slowly, letting it warm him as the fire crackled softly in the hearth. The ring on his finger pulsed once more. Across the miles, other rings, sisters to Vilya, stirred quietly. The stars shone gently over Rivendell that night, their silvery light flickering softly through the thin veil of mist that floated just above the valley. The river Brunnen flowed calmly, its murmurs like the soft whisper of a lullaby. A breeze stirred the golden leaves that had not yet fallen, rustling them with the lightest of touches. The trees, ancient and wise, stood in silent vigil, their bark holding memories of ages long past. The world was hushed, as if holding its breath before some distant change. Elren half-elven sat beneath one of the oldest trees near the edge of the courtyard, cloaked in a robe of deep blue, his dark hair falling softly over his shoulders. He watched the stars without urgency, as one who had seen many nights such as this, yet never ceased to find wonder in their constancy. On his finger, Vilya, the ring of air, glimmered faintly, a sapphire embedded in a delicate band of gold. It pulsed now and then, not with fire or fury, but with the steady rhythm of something ancient and enduring. He could feel it, a tension in the wind, a tremor beneath the peaceful soil. Sauron's shadow, though far away in the east, had begun to stretch again across the lands. Whispers of his servants gathering in secret corners of the world had reached even Rivendell, carried on the wings of birds, or woven into the melodies of wandering minstrels who did not know the truths they sang. But here, tonight, all was still. The valley was safe, for now, and the stars remained above him like old friends. Elren closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered a time, long ago, when he had first received Vilya from Gil-galad, his king and kin, in the waning days of the Second Age. Back then, the ring had seemed brighter, or perhaps he had been younger, more hopeful, and less weary. It was not a weapon, Vilya. It was a preserver, a guardian against decay. With it, Elren had kept Rivendell hidden, safe, and beautiful through centuries of subtle threat. Flowers bloomed longer here, the seasons turned with more gentleness, and time seemed less harsh. Yet he knew such magic could not hold forever. A quiet step behind him stirred him gently from his reverie. It was Arister, one of his oldest counselors, who bowed slightly before speaking. "My lord, the east wind bears a new scent," Arister said softly, as though not wanting to disturb the stillness. "It may be nothing, yet it does not feel like nothing." Elrond opened his eyes again, his gaze returning to the sky. "Few things are truly nothing," he said with a faint smile. "Even the smallest rustle can herald a storm." He stood slowly, robes rustling like leaves in the wind. Together, the two walked back toward the house of Elrond, their steps measured and slow. Lights glowed from within, soft lanterns lit with a gentle flame that did not flicker or smoke. The halls of Rivendell never knew harshness. The beauty here was quiet, and the walls were shaped with care. Songs drifted faintly through the corridors, though the voices had dimmed as most now slept. Before parting, Elrond placed a hand on Arister's shoulder. Let the watch be doubled near the borders for the next few days. Quietly. Let no one feel alarmed. Arister bowed again and left with a silent nod. Elrond remained still for a time, his fingers touching the edge of Vilya. The ring was warm tonight, responding to his thoughts perhaps, or to the thoughts of something else, far away. In his study, a fire was kept low in the hearth. Books lined the tall shelves, tales of ancient days, of Numenor's rise and fall, of battles fought beneath stars that had now changed in the sky. Elrond moved to the desk where maps were laid out, some old enough to show kingdoms that no longer existed, and some newer, updated by the rangers who still traveled far and wide. His eyes lingered on the mountains in the east. Dol Guldur had grown quiet for many years, but that silence had never sat easy in his heart. He poured himself a small cup of herbal tea, the steam curling into the air like a sigh. The scent was of chamomile and athelas, calming and clean. He sipped it slowly, letting it warm him as the fire crackled softly in the hearth. The ring on his finger pulsed once more. Across the miles, other rings, sisters to Vilya, stirred quietly. The mists that gathered over the land of Lothlorien were not of fear nor sorrow, not yet. They were cool and silver, drawn up from the waters of the Celeborn River, winding through the golden woods like breath on a mirror. The Malorn trees, ancient and vast, rose like columns of time itself, their golden leaves clinging to the branches as though resisting the arrival of a world beyond their knowing. Beneath them, the forest floor was soft, covered in gold and green. All was hushed, save the quiet murmur of leaves and the faint trill of a nightingale in the distant canopy. In the heart of this quiet realm stood Caras Galadhon, the city of the trees, where woven stairways curled around mighty trunks and lanterns glowed like stars caught between the boughs. Here, peace had endured while the world outside shifted and trembled. And at the highest flet, within a chamber that opened to the moonlit sky, stood Galadriel. Tall and still, she watched the forest with eyes deeper than any mortal could understand. She had seen the birth of this land, its rise and fall through the years, and her wisdom stretched far beyond the memory of men. Her hair was like woven silver and gold, and her robes flowed about her like water touched by starlight. On her finger shone Ninya, the ring of water, made of mithril, bearing a white stone that shimmered with the light of the stars. Her hand rested gently on the edge of the basin, the mirror of Galadriel, though the water within it was calm and clear. It had shown her many things in the past, the distant sorrow of the elves who had left for the west, the flickering shadows of Sauron's spies moving through the dark places of the world, and the birth of hope in hearts she had never met. But tonight, it showed her nothing. Nothing can be a sign, too. From behind her, a familiar voice spoke with quiet respect. "My lady," Celeborn said, his voice low and even, "the southern borders have grown more restless. Our scouts hear whispers from Dol Guldur. The birds no longer sing there, and the beasts flee the shadow." Galadriel did not turn right away. Instead, she dipped her fingers into the water of the mirror and let it ripple, though no vision rose. "The silence troubles me more than the noise," she murmured. When the enemy moves in plain sight, we may watch and weigh him. But when he hides, the roots of fear grow deeper. Celeborn stepped beside her, his silver hair barely lifting in the soft breeze. He said nothing for a time, only watching the soft glow of Nenya, which pulsed faintly in the darkness. "It has long been quiet," he said finally, "too long. Sauron fell, yes, but he was never truly destroyed." Galadriel's eyes flicked up to the stars above. "We knew this. We who remember the First Age, we knew that shadows seldom perish. They retreat, reshape, and return." Far away in the east, over the distant mountains of Mordor, clouds gathered. They were not yet visible from the golden wood, but Galadriel could feel them, not on her skin, but in her spirit. The light of Nenya, once cool and steady, now responded faintly to some distant call. Not far from the borders of Lorien, the Galadrim, the tree guard, had begun to notice strange movements. Flickers in the woods, birds flying in startled flocks, and deer no longer grazing where they once did. Some said they had seen shapes in the underbrush, tall and gaunt, with eyes like dim embers. Scouts had found no trace, only cold ashes where fire should never have been. Galadriel turned from the mirror at last, her voice steady. "If Sauron truly gathers strength again, then the time of the elves grows shorter still. Lothlorien can endure a little longer, but not forever. And the rings, they were not made for war." Celeborn's brow furrowed slightly. "You speak as though we have already lost." "No," she said quietly. "But the world is changing. I can feel it in the earth, in the water. Even the stars seem to drift more slowly." They stood in silence together, the light of the ring glimmering between them. Far across the lands, the Anduin River shimmered in the moonlight as it made its slow journey southward, weaving between hills and forests. Somewhere beyond its bends, the fortress of Dol Guldur brooded in silence. Long had it been abandoned, or so the free peoples had hoped, after the White Council had driven Sauron forth from it many years before. But now, though no trumpet had sounded, the darkness was returning to that place. Creatures had begun to stir in the ruins. Orcs and darker things, too twisted for names. Wraith-like messengers passed unseen in the night, carrying word and command between dark places. The necromancer, as he had once been called, was no longer hiding. He was preparing. And in the forest of Mirkwood, which had once been Greenwood the Great, spiders crept in greater number, and the air grew thick with a presence that could not be named. King Thranduil felt it, though he did not yet speak of it aloud. Even the dwarves of Erebor, far to the north, had begun to whisper uneasily. Back in Lorien, Galadriel stood at the edge of her high platform and looked out over the forest. Below, the lanterns of the Galadrim twinkled softly through the trees like fireflies. They did not know yet what stirred beyond the wood. They still sang their songs and polished their spears in peace. But the peace was thinning, like a veil over eyes that could no longer pretend. She closed her eyes. There was a choice that loomed ahead, whether to use the ring in her keeping to hold the darkness at bay, or to preserve its secrecy, its subtle protection, even as the tide grew stronger. Using the ring openly would draw Sauron's eye. It would be to declare herself in the struggle, to risk falling into the same trap that had consumed so many. But to do nothing, was that not its own kind of surrender? Still, she remembered the words of Celebrimbor, the ringmaker, long gone into death and memory. The elven rings were made without the touch of Sauron's will, crafted in secret to preserve and to shelter. Not to dominate, never to destroy. They were made for beauty, for endurance, for healing. And such power should not be turned to war. Her hand tightened faintly around Nanya. No, she whispered to the wind. Not yet. Not while Lorien still breathes. Above her, the stars glimmered faintly behind soft clouds. The night deepened, and the world, though troubled, remained still. And Galadriel, Lady of Light, watched the shadows begin to stir on the far edge of the world. The sea whispered its endless lullaby along the shores of Linden, where the gray waves kissed the white sand in patient rhythm. The wind, cool and salt-laden, moved softly among the pines and evergreens that clung to the hills, their boughs swaying like slow dancers beneath the stars. The sky above was a blanket of deep velvet, scattered with constellations old and unchanged, guides to mariners and dreamers alike. Here, at the edge of Middle-earth, stood the Grey Havens, a place of farewells and quiet endings. Ships slept in the harbor, their sails folded like the wings of gray birds at rest. Lanterns glowed gently along the docks, and their golden reflections shimmered in the still waters. This was not a place of war, nor of kings, but of waiting, of wisdom, and of peace slowly drawing its final breath. High above the harbor, on a white tower that overlooked sea and sky, stood Certain the shipwright. Cloaked in robes the color of pearl and mist, he leaned upon a carved staff of driftwood older than most realms, and his beard, long and silver, moved in the wind like sea foam. In his eyes was a deep quiet, not the quiet of ignorance, but the kind born of witnessing many ages rise and fall like tides. He was old, older even than Galadriel and Elrond, though he bore the weight of his years with a grace like the stars themselves. Upon his hand gleamed Narya, the ring of fire, ruby red and gentle in its flame, though it did not burn. It gave no heat, but it kindled spirit, the fire of hope, of resilience, of defiance in the face of cold and despair. It had never been used for conquest. That was not its purpose. But in silent times, it had stirred the hearts of the weary and kindled courage where it had faded. Tonight, however, the flames seemed to shiver. Certain gazed out toward the west. The horizon was clear, the stars untouched. The sea, ever untroubled by the affairs of men and elves, rolled calmly toward Valinor, that undying land beyond the mortal grasp. And yet he felt it, not in his bones, nor in the sky, but in the quiet. Something unseen had shifted in the east. The tide of the world, once retreating, now seemed to rise again. Behind him, soft steps approached, deliberate and careful. "It's late, Certain," said a gentle voice. "You stand alone tonight more than most." Certain did not turn. He recognized the voice, Galdr, one of the counselors of Linden, a wise elf and longtime friend. "Alone, perhaps," Certain murmured, his voice soft and low like distant thunder, "but not idle." "The sea has spoken again." Galdr stepped to his side, pulling his cloak tighter against the breeze. "And what does the sea say?" Certain's eyes did not leave the water. "It says the wind has changed." There was a long silence between them. The waves continued to wash upon the shore, and somewhere below, the faint chime of rigging in the harbor sang like distant bells. "Word comes from the east," Galdr said at last. "The rangers have seen strange fires near the Anduin. And in the woods of the south, creatures of darkness no longer hide from the sun." Certain nodded slowly. "The same shadows that once grew in Mirkwood. And before that, in Mordor." Galder turned his gaze toward the stars. Do you believe it is Sauron? I believe Sauron never truly left, said Certain. And now he gathers again. The fire in Narya glowed slightly brighter, a subtle thrum that responded to his thoughts. It was no accident that the ring had stirred. As the darkness grew, so too did the will of the ring to oppose it. Yet even now, it offered no command, only readiness. There will come a time, Certain said, when this ring must pass from my hand. I have known it from the moment I received it. It was never meant to remain here, not forever. Galder looked at him with quiet alarm. To whom would you entrust such a gift? Certain smiled faintly. He has not yet arrived. But he will. A traveler, cloaked in gray, with eyes like the morning sky. A servant of the secret fire. When he comes, I shall know. You see far, Certain, Galder said. I see enough, replied the shipwright. Enough to know that the choice before us is not whether evil will rise, for it always does. The choice is whether we will answer, or simply guard what little peace we still hold. Again, silence fell between them, not heavy, but thoughtful, like snow falling on soft ground. Certain turned then, stepping slowly down the winding stairs of the tower. His movements were not hurried. He had long learned the value of patience, of moving not in fear but in steadiness. The harbor would be ready when the time came. The ships would sail when they must. And if war should come once more, then he would send his people west and entrust Middle-earth to those who would remain. But as long as he bore Narya, there would be one light that did not falter. He paused once before entering the hall beneath the tower, where soft candlelight warmed the carved wood and stone. Upon a table nearby lay maps of the coast, tidily arranged. Shelves from distant shores lined the shelves, reminders of voyages completed long ago. He touched the edge of the map that showed the land as it had once been, Beleriand, now lost beneath the waves. A sigh escaped him, deep and slow, like wind escaping the sails. So much had changed. So much had faded. And yet, the ring still burned. That night, as Certain rested in his quiet chamber, the flame of Narya burned gently beside him, like a hearth fire in a deep winter. It did not speak, but it comforted. And in his dreams, he saw a star falling across the sky, not in destruction, but in arrival. Somewhere far away, another hand reached toward the sky, Elrond and Rivendell, Galadriel and Lorien, each bearing their own burden, each feeling the choice that came ever closer. None of them spoke of it yet. But each one knew. The time was drawing near when they would have to decide. Not in battle, not with swords drawn, but in silence, in thought, and in the weight of long-kept promises. And the world, breathing in the stillness between storms, waited. The valley of Imladris, known to most as Rivendell, lay wrapped in quiet beneath a pale morning sky. The river Bruinen flowed with gentle song between mossy stones and over roots that drank deeply from its clear waters. Trees leaned close to the water's edge, their leaves catching the early light like coins of green and gold. Here, the world did not shout. It whispered, and the whispers were old, full of memory and music and things not easily spoken. The air carried the scent of pine and earth, mingled with the light breath of spring blossoms. Birds called softly from the branches, and every now and then the wind would pass, touching the curtains that hung in the archways of the last homely house, stirring them like dreams just waking from sleep. Elrond Half-Elven, Lord of Rivendell, sat alone in the hall of fire where no fire yet burned. The great hearth, carved with stories of old battles and long-lost kings, remained cold, for the day had only just begun, and warmth was still held gently in the stone of the walls. A single skylight let in the soft glow of dawn, and it fell across Elrond's face like a blessing from the sun. He was still, his eyes on a scroll in his hand, though he had not turned the page in many minutes. His mind, old and far-reaching, wandered beyond the parchment, beyond the room, even beyond the borders of Rivendell itself. His brow was thoughtful, the lines of many ages etched lightly into his expression. Upon his hand shone Vilya, the ring of air, sapphire bright, set in gold. It pulsed faintly, as though breathing with him, a quiet presence more felt than seen. It was the mightiest of the three, wrought by Celebrimbor with such care that even time seemed to pause around it. In Elrond's keeping, it had preserved Rivendell through long years of darkness and doubt, keeping its beauty whole when much else in the world had been scarred. But now, it stirred more often, and Elrond was not one to ignore such signs. A soft footstep touched the stone behind him, and a voice, gentle, familiar, spoke. "You rise early, my lord." Elrond looked up, offering a faint smile to Eristor, his longtime counselor and friend. "The day brings questions," Elrond said quietly, "and sleep no longer shields me from them." Eristor approached with silent steps, his robes trailing like mist behind him. He did not ask what questions. He knew them well enough. The elves of Rivendell were quiet people, but they were not blind. Shadows moved again in the east, and Sauron's name, long unspoken aloud, was now whispered with unease even in the safety of Elrond's house. "You feel it too," Eristor said, not as a question. Elrond nodded. The same chill that once crept from Dol Guldur now moves again, though it has not shown its face. The enemy gathers strength, but we do not yet see his form. Eristor lowered himself onto a carved bench beside the fireplace. "There are rumors from the north. A company of men vanished in the wilds near the mountains of mist. No bodies found, no signs of struggle, only silence." "I have heard," Elrond said, folding the scroll carefully. "The Dunedain speak of dreams, visions sent to them in their sleep. Dark wings, burning eyes. The enemy does not wait idly." A quiet passed between them, filled only by the distant voice of the river. "I have often thought," Elrond said at last, "that the greatest burden of the Elven Rings is not their power, but the silence with which they weigh upon us. They were made not to conquer, but to preserve. And yet, the world changes around us, and what we seek to preserve begins to slip from our grasp." Eristor's gaze moved to the ring upon Elrond's hand. "Would you use it?" he asked softly. "If the darkness rose again in full? Would you call upon Vilya's strength?" Elrond did not answer quickly. He looked out through the open archway, to the garden beyond, where the morning sun had begun to touch the petals of the lilies. "To use the ring," he said slowly, "is to reveal it. To draw the eye of Sauron, who longs to reclaim all that was made with the craft he taught. And if he were to regain the One Ring," he trailed off, his voice quiet, "then our rings would be but ashes." Eristor inclined his head. "Then perhaps it is better not to use it." "But to do nothing," Elrond murmured, "is to let the world decay while we guard our walls." He stood, walking to the open window, where vines curled delicately around the frame. He looked west, where the mountains glowed in the morning light. "I have built Rivendell to be a refuge, not a fortress. Yet I wonder now if refuge alone is enough. Arister remained silent. He knew Elrond's heart was torn between wisdom and action, between hope and caution. And Elrond's heart had known much. He had stood at the side of Gil-galad in the last great alliance. He had seen the fall of Sauron's physical form and the loss of his king. He had borne the grief of that age into the next, raising his children in a world that seemed endlessly uncertain. Arwen, his daughter, now walked under the same stars that once watched over her mother, stars that bore witness to joy and sorrow alike. Elrond closed his eyes for a moment, letting the wind from the mountains touch his face. And then, far away, a bell rang softly, a call to the morning meal, echoing through the halls like a gentle reminder that life still moved on, even in shadow. He turned back to Arister. "Send word to Lorien," he said, "and to the Grey Havens. We must speak together, those of us who bear the rings. The time to wait in silence may be passing." Arister inclined his head, rising. "As you wish, my lord." He departed without further word, leaving Elrond alone again in the Hall of Fire. And as Elrond stood beneath the archway, the ring upon his hand glowing softly in the sunlight, he wondered, not with fear, but with the deep sorrow of one who had lived too long, whether the age of the elves was nearing its end. For if they were to use their rings, they would reveal them. And if they did not, the world might forget them altogether. But even then, Elrond thought, there is still hope, thin as morning mist, quiet as the rustle of a leaf, and while hope endures, so too does purpose. The river flowed on, and Rivendell, for a little while longer, remained at peace. In the golden wood of Lothlorien, time passed differently. It did not rush or stumble as it did in the lands of men, nor did it march forward with the steady tread of stone and season. Instead, it drifted, like the silver leaves of the mullein trees, floating softly on the breeze, catching sunlight like threads of silk. The forest sang without voice. Each tree hummed quietly in the language of roots and rain. Light filtered down through boughs that held autumn's gold all through the year, casting patterns on the moss-covered ground. It was a place untouched by haste, wrapped in a stillness so deep that even the stars above seemed to hang more slowly in the sky. Here, in the heart of the forest, in the hidden haven of Caras Galadhon, dwelt Galadriel, Lady of Lorien. Tall and graceful, she walked among her people with quiet steps and watchful eyes. Her presence was like moonlight, not harsh, but luminous, commanding without sound. She was older than most could remember, her memory stretching back to the 2 trees of Valinor and the first light of the world. She had seen kingdoms rise and fall, had stood beside great kings and watched as shadows stretched across Middle-earth more than once. But in Lorien, she had woven a realm of peace. It was her gift, her protection, her quiet defiance against the dark. And yet, even here, the wind had begun to change. This evening, the air was gentle, scented with mullein blossoms and sweet earth. Lanterns glowed softly in the trees, their lights swaying like tiny stars. Galadriel stood alone on a high platform where the city's branches opened to the heavens. Her long hair shimmered like starlight, and upon her finger gleamed Nenya, the ring of water, white and cold and beautiful, like a drop of frozen light. Nenya did not burn, nor did it thrum with fire. It calmed. It preserved. It held back decay and sorrow, like a shield of stillness cast across the land. Under its influence, Lothlorien had remained untouched by time, its beauty suspended as if the years dared not enter. But nothing, Not even a ring of power could keep the world away forever. Galadriel looked toward the east. There, beyond the woods and beyond the mountains, the land darkened. Not in color, but in feeling. A pressure, invisible but steady, pressing against the borders of her thoughts. Sauron stirred again in Mordor. She could feel it, not as fear, but as a quiet tension, a ripple beneath calm waters. And her ring responded. Mania glowed faintly, a cold gleam pulsing with thought. It did not speak, but she knew its language well. The ring urged preservation, to hold what beauty remained. But its strength came with consequence. Should she wield it openly, its power would shine like a beacon, and Sauron would see. He would know. And the great eye that once swept across the land like fire would turn once more to Lothlorien. Galadriel sighed, a sound soft as a leaf falling in stillness. Behind her, another presence stirred. She turned slightly as Celeborn, her husband and Lord of Lorien, approached. Clad in robes of silver gray, his bearing was noble and quiet, his face thoughtful, his gaze steady as a mountain lake. They had ruled together for many ages, bound not only by marriage, but by vision and by sorrow shared. The trees have grown restless, he said quietly. Galadriel nodded. They remember the days before this peace. Celeborn stepped beside her, placing his hand lightly upon the carved rail of the platform. Elrond sends word, he said after a pause. The three must speak. He calls for counsel. Galadriel did not answer immediately. She looked to the sky, where twilight had begun to settle in lavender and indigo hues. One by one, the stars appeared, like ancient eyes opening once more. I knew this would come, she said at last. The world does not allow us to linger forever. Celeborn watched her with gentle concern. Would you leave Lothlorien? If the time came? She turned to him then, her eyes luminous and full of quiet sorrow. It is not for myself that I grieve, but for all that shall fade. This land, this light, it is the last echo of the world that once was. But the world moves forward, he said. Yes, she whispered, and it forgets. She looked again at Nenya. It did not comfort her as it once had. Its power was not fading, but its meaning was changing. Once, she had used it to keep the past alive, to shelter a memory of beauty that had long since passed in the lands beyond. But perhaps now the time had come to release it. To let go. Still, the thought stung like frost on blooming petals. We have always known, she said softly, that the use of the rings would be tested. Not in battle, but in silence. In choice. To act or to fade. Celeborn said nothing, for there was little left to say. They had faced many sorrows, and they had borne them all. But this was different. The end of an age did not come with the roar of war. It came with whispers. With the stillness before a departure. Galadriel closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw the sea, the gray expanse that stretched beyond Middle-earth, beyond time, to the shores of Valinor. The call of the west was soft, but growing louder. One day, she would answer it. But not yet. Not while the shadows still gathered. And yet, the One Ring remained. Its presence, though hidden, tilted the balance. If it were found, or if it fell into Sauron's hands, then all would be lost. Even the three, beautiful and hidden, would fall under his will. Their power would wither. The peace she had fought to preserve would dissolve like mist. But there was still time. A little time. She stepped back from the railing, her decision unspoken, yet firm. She would go to Rivendell. She would sit with the other bearers. And together, they would decide, not for themselves, but for all who still lived under the sky. "Prepare the messengers," she said softly to Celeborn. "We leave with the next moonrise." He bowed his head and left her in the hush of the evening. Galadriel stood alone once more, the wind teasing strands of her golden hair. Below, the trees whispered to each other in their secret tongue. And above, the stars turned slowly, watching. Far in the west, beyond the rolling hills of the Shire and the whispering forests of Eriador, where the land met the sea in quiet farewell, stood the Grey Havens, Midland, the last port of the Elves in Middle-earth. Here, the ships waited in stillness, their white sails furled and their hulls kissed by the tide. They did not stir unless called by voices of old, voices that sang not of conquest, but of longing. Longing for home. The sea mist hung in gentle veils over the harbor, silvering the stones and shrouding the towers in a soft, sleeping hush. The waves murmured always, not loud or fierce, but steady, a lullaby from the wide waters of Belagair, singing of places unseen, of shores untouched by time. And in a tall house that overlooked the harbor, in a room open to the wind and the stars, stood certain the shipwright. He was quiet as ever, his movements deliberate, his gaze deep. A long silver beard trailed down his robes, and his eyes held the memory of all the seas he had watched, not only in this age, but in the ones before. For he was among the eldest of the elves remaining in Middle-earth, and his wisdom came not from books or battles, but from years spent listening to water, to sky, and to the whispers of the world's slow turning. He held in his hand a small piece of driftwood, worn smooth by time, and turned it gently between his fingers. It was the sort of thing that washed ashore from nowhere in particular, shaped not by hand but by tide. He liked such things. They reminded him that the sea never forgot. It carried stories, softened their edges, and returned them, changed. Upon his finger shone Narya, the ring of fire, ruby red and warm, like a coal that never burned out. Unlike Nenya or Vilya, Narya did not preserve or conceal. It stirred hearts, kindled courage, inspired those around it to endure even when hope dimmed. In the long years since it had come into his keeping, certain had worn it not as a weapon, but as a quiet strength. He had lent it to others when the time came, giving it once to Gandalf, though none but few ever knew. Now, with the western sky glowing faintly from the last light of day, Narya pulsed softly. Not in alarm, but in awareness. As if it, too, sensed that something was shifting in the balance of the world. Certain turned toward the open archway of his home, where the scent of salt and rain drifted in. He moved slowly, not from weakness but from the calm patience of one who no longer rushed. He descended the curved stair that led to the harbor, his footsteps barely touching the stone. The white gulls wheeled overhead, calling out in voices both lonely and free. He reached the water's edge and stood at the end of the long gray pier. The ships rocked gently, tethered in silence. They were built for a voyage not of conquest, but of return, a final journey westward to Valinor, the blessed realm, from which many had come and to which only a few might yet return. And yet he remained. Not because he was bound, but because his purpose had not yet passed. His eyes turned toward the east, where a shadow rose unseen, slow and creeping. Sauron's strength, once broken, stirred again. Certain did not fear it. He had seen worse. But the question now was not whether the shadow would rise, but what the bearers of light would do. And light, even in elven hands, could burn or blind. He had received Elrond's message that morning. It had come with a bird whose feathers shimmered faintly with blue, a messenger of Imladris. The words were few, but the meaning deep. The three must gather. The time of silence was ending. Certain had felt it too. He placed his hand upon one of the ship's railings, worn smooth by many hands, and stood there a long while, letting the sea speak to him. Its words were not clear, but they were truthful. Change was coming. Whether by flame or by wind, the tide would shift. Behind him, soft footsteps touched the stone. He knew them without turning. It was Elanath, one of the few remaining of the Telerian kin who served the Grey Haven still. She was tall and quiet, her voice rarely raised, her eyes always watching the horizon. She had been born here, long after the glory of Beleriand had drowned beneath the sea, but her heart held the same ache as those who remembered. "My lord," she said gently, "do you sail soon?" Certain shook his head. "Not yet." "You've had the message then?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He nodded. "Yes. Elrond calls." Elanath looked out over the ships. "And will you go?" A moment passed. "I will," he said. "For though I am the last to leave, I must be among the first to choose." Elanath stepped beside him, her eyes full of the soft sadness that came with the understanding of endings. "Is it time?" she asked. Certain did not answer directly. Instead, he looked down at Narya, which gleamed like a warm ember in the twilight. "The fire still burns," he said quietly. "But for whom it burns now, that is what we must decide." They stood in silence, the sea wrapping around them like a lullaby. "I will leave before the week's end," Certain said at last. "Tell the harbor folk. Prepare the road east." Elanath bowed and left without another word. And Certain remained, the sea breeze catching the ends of his hair, the wind tasting faintly of change. He closed his eyes, remembering a time long ago, the shores of ancient Lindon, the ships of the First Age, the voices of those who had already sailed beyond the world. He remembered Feanor's fire and the long shadow it had cast. He remembered the Summerals and the endless grief they had brought. And now, again, came a choice. To wield the ring or to let it fade with the passing age. To spark courage or to surrender to stillness. But for tonight, he would not decide. Tonight, he would listen. To the waves. To the stars. To the wind that carried the memory of all things. Narya glowed softly in the gathering dark. And the ships waited, their sails asleep. The stars had turned slowly overhead by the time the three had gathered. They met in Imladris, in the hidden valley where the sound of waterfalls soothed even the deepest worry and the shadows of the outside world could not easily pass. Rivendell, as men called it, stood still amid the turning of the ages, a place carved from peace and shaped by memory. It was a house of healing, of song and study, where the wind whispered through the trees in elvish tongues and even the stones seemed to listen. The hall where they met was open to the night. Lanterns glowed with soft gold, hanging like fruit from high beams of carved wood. The air was cool, touched by early frost, and yet the heart of the place was warm with thought. Cushions had been laid, low and wide, around a single circular table of white stone. At its center burned a quiet flame, not high, not hot, but steady, like a memory preserved in light. Elren was the first to sit. He came not in armor nor finery, but in robes of midnight blue embroidered with silver stars. His face was calm, though his eyes were deep with thought, deep, too, with sorrow born from long years and many partings. He had ruled Rivendell for an age and more, sheltering all who came in need, and had worn Vilya, the Ring of Air, as a steward and guardian, never as conqueror. Upon his finger, Vilya shimmered with its pale sapphire light, like the dome of the sky gathered into a gem. Galadriel arrived soon after, silent as moonlight. She moved without hurry, her gown the color of pearl, her presence cool and ageless. Nenya, the ring of water, glittered faintly on her hand, its brightness soft as frost on glass. She inclined her head to Elrond in greeting, then seated herself opposite him, her long golden hair flowing like water across her shoulders. They exchanged no words at first. The stars above glittered in their slow rhythm, watching as they had since the first days. At last, from the far archway, a third figure entered. Cloaked in gray and white, tall and steady in step, Certain approached like one who had seen the tides of the world and walked alongside them. His silver beard caught the lantern light. His eyes, pale like mist over the sea, took in the two before him with quiet gravity. He said nothing, but when he took his place, a hush settled that was not imposed, it simply was. So they sat, Elrond of Rivendell, Galadriel of Lothlorien, certain of the Grey Havens, the bearers of the three. For a time, there was only silence. Not awkward, nor tense, but thoughtful, like a breath taken before speech. Outside, the water over stone continued its lullaby, and leaves rustled high in the trees, brushing one another like old friends in quiet reunion. Elrond spoke first. "The shadow moves again," he said simply. "And with it, our silence must end." Certain gave a slow nod. Even the waves have changed their song. Galadriel's voice was soft but certain. "Sauron rises, though he has not yet found what he seeks. The One Ring stirs his will, even if it remains lost to us." Elrond looked down at his hand, at Vilya's blue glow. "Our rings are bound to it. If he regains it, we fall. And if it is destroyed, we fade," Certain finished. There it was, spoken plain at last. The truth that lay beneath all their decisions, all their thoughts and dreams, that their power, however pure in purpose, was not truly their own. The rings had been made by Celebrimbor with Sauron's instruction, and though untouched by his hand directly, they could not escape his fate. If the one endured, so would the three. If it fell, so would they. "Have you used yours?" Elrond asked Galadriel quietly. She looked toward the dark forest visible beyond the archways. "Not in strength, but its light holds Lothlorien as it was. Not to command, but to remember, to preserve." Certain placed his hand gently on the table. "And I have used Narya, though subtly, in times when hearts faltered. In others' hands, it may have kindled more, but I chose quiet fire." Elrond gave a small nod. "I have wielded Vilya to guard this valley, to shield it from eyes that should not see. Without it, Rivendell might have fallen long ago." They sat, the truth lay bare among them. None had used their rings for domination. None had sought to rule, nor even to fight. They had preserved what beauty remained. Yet the price of preservation was stagnation, and the shadow now forced them to choose to stand aside and let the world shift, or to act and risk drawing Sauron's gaze. "We could wield them," Galadriel said, not as suggestion, but as observation. "Stand against the dark as guardians. Kindle all that is left. And be seen," Certain said. "Exposed. Yet the one still lies hidden. Our use of the three could rouse him more quickly. He will know. He will come." Elrond looked between them. "Then we ask, is it better to act and risk all? Or wait and perhaps fade with the world we sought to protect?" Outside, the wind rose gently, brushing against the leaves like fingers over harp strings. Galadriel's gaze was distant, as if she looked through time itself. "We are not the world. We cannot hold it in stillness forever. But if we let go now," Elrond said, "what happens to the last of our peoples? The last green havens?" Certain gave a quiet sigh. "They fade. But perhaps they must. Not in ruin, but in peace." No one spoke for a time. The fire between them burned low, not dimming, but calm, like breath before sleep. "It may be," Elrond said at last, "that our duty is not to wield the three at all. Not to shine more brightly, but to step aside, so that others may rise." Galadriel turned her gaze to him, thoughtful. "And if they fall?" "Then they fall," Certain said gently, "as we once did," and rose again. A silence settled, not one of fear, but of peace. The world was changing. The age of the elves was ending. Not in fire, not in flood, but like a song concluding its final verse. The last note still hung in the air. And the three who bore the rings knew now, without speaking it again, what must be done. They would not wield the rings to fight, nor to hold the past in place. They would wait. They would watch. And when the time came, when the one was found or lost, they would let their rings fade with the world they had preserved. The fire in the center of the table dimmed to embers. Each of them stood, slowly, with the grace of trees in winter. No more words were needed. One by one, they stepped out beneath the stars, each turning to their own path, to Rivendell, to Lothlorien, to the Havens. Their choices made not with anger or pride, but with the quiet wisdom of the ages. And above, the stars turned on. The world waited. The world turned slowly, as it always had. Spring followed winter, and summer rose gently in its wake. The fields of Middle-earth breathed once more, green and gold in the morning sun, quiet beneath the turning stars. The trees swayed in time to old winds. The rivers sang to themselves again, soft and steady. Yet beneath the peace that hung like morning mist, a slow and silent change was unfolding. It was not the thunder of war, nor the clamor of kings, but the parting of a breath, the soft closing of a chapter. In the golden woods of Lothlorien, the mullein trees still stood tall, their leaves like living gold. But those who walked beneath them now heard fewer voices. The elves, the Galadrim, were leading, some to the havens, others into the deep forest to linger just a little longer. Yet the heart of the land no longer pulsed with the power it once held. For Galadriel, the Lady of Light, had cast her eyes westward. She walked alone that morning through the golden glades, her steps so light they barely stirred the dew. Minion no longer shone upon her hand, for its radiance, once so steady and silver, had begun to dim. Its magic was not gone, not yet, but it was quiet, as though it too knew its time had passed. She stopped beside a quiet stream, one she had known since the founding of her realm. The water was clear, but its voice was softer now. No longer enchanted, but merely a stream, lovely in its own right, but no longer held outside of time. Her reflection rippled before her. Not young, not old, simply enduring. A soft breeze touched her cheek, and in it, she heard no words, only memory. The voices of friends and kin long gone, the songs of Doriath and the laughter of Valinor before the darkness came. The time of the elves had been long and beautiful, and it was ending. In Rivendell, Elrond stood on the balcony of his house. The sun was rising, painting the distant peaks of the misty mountains in soft firelight. He had known this view since before Isildur had claimed the One Ring. He had seen it in war, in joy, and in grief. And now he saw it in stillness. Vilya still lay on his hand, but like Minya, its light had faded to a gentle glimmer, a fading star in a brightening sky. The valley of Imladris remained a place of peace, but even its magic, long hidden from time and decay, now allowed the creeping vines of age to return. The gardens grew wilder, and the waters flowed with no enchantment but their own. He had gathered his household, told them the time was near. His sons would remain for a while longer, bound as they were to the world of men. But he would go west. The path to the Grey Havens was already in his mind, as familiar as a memory. For what else was left? The ring-bearers had made their choice. And far in the west, at the edge of all lands, Certain stood beside the final ship. The white swan-shaped vessel rested gently in the harbor of the Grey Havens, its sail furled like a sleeping wing. It was built for a single journey, the final journey, and it waited without impatience. The sea was calm, the tide rising just enough to nudge the hull in a tender, rhythmic gesture. Certain, old beyond reckoning, placed a weathered hand upon its side. Narya had grown quiet too. The flame within it did not flicker out, but it no longer stirred the heart as once it had. The world no longer needed the fire to endure. He turned as the sound of soft footfalls reached him. There, walking slowly down the curved stone path, came the travelers, Elrond, cloaked in twilight blue, and Galadriel, robed in white and silver. Beside them walked another, smaller figure, one whose step was slower, but whose presence was felt deeply even in silence. Frodo Baggins, the ring-bearer. He had carried the one into fire, and though it had been destroyed, the wounds it left behind had not healed. Nor could they, not in this world. For the shadow had touched him in ways even time could not undo. So he, too, had been offered passage, not as elf, but as one who had borne a burden greater than many could bear. And with him King Gandalf, now revealed as he truly was, Alarin, servant of the secret fire. Narya had passed from Certain's hand to his, and the old wizard wore it still, but it, too, had given all it could. The fire that had kindled hearts had done its work. There were no grand farewells, no trumpets, no banners, only quiet voices, embraces, and the touch of hands parting. The ship took them gently, one by one. Galadriel, Elrond, Gandalf, Frodo. Others came too. Bilbo, asleep beneath a woolen cloak. a few elves of great age. And last, certain stepped aboard. The sail was loosed. The ship turned from the shore, its hull slicing the water without sound. The wind caught it like a breath, and it began to glide westward, out of Midland, into the wide sea. The sky above was soft with clouds, and the horizon glimmered faintly. None spoke. They simply watched as Middle-earth fell behind, not in sorrow, not in fear, but in peace. The land that had held their joys and burdens was passing into memory, not vanishing, simply becoming part of the long story. As the ship sailed on, the rings grew dim. One by one, their light ceased. Nanya, clear as water, faded. Vilya, open as the sky, gone. Narya, fierce as flame, at rest. And so the power of the 3 elven rings, forged to preserve, to heal, to inspire, came to its quiet end. But in their fading, there was no loss. For Middle-earth, unshackled from the enchantments of the elves, could grow in its own way now. The age of men had come. The shadows would rise again, as they always did, and light would meet them in turn. But that was no longer the burden of the Eldar. Their watch had ended. The ship sailed toward the light beyond the world. A soft glow, not bright, not dazzling, but warm like a hearth fire waiting at journey's end. The shore unseen, but known. And behind them, Middle-earth slumbered beneath the stars. Not unchanged, but alive. And so it was. The secret of the Elven Rings was not that they were powerful, or beautiful, or ancient. It was that they were never meant to rule, only to guard, and then to let go. And now, in the quiet turning of the sea, they passed into legend. Just as all things must. Sleep well. The end. And so, as the story fades into the quiet night, let the gentle rhythm of your breath guide you into a place of rest. The journey has ended, but the peace it brings is yours to carry, wrapped in the stillness of the stars above. With each passing moment, let your mind drift, just like the ship that sails into the distant horizon. The world can wait, and for now, you are safe in the calm of this space. Feel the weight of the day lift away as you slowly slip into a restful slumber. Know that when you wake, the world will be waiting, but for now, it is time to simply let go. Sleep well, dear friend, and may your dreams be as peaceful as the quiet lands of Middle-earth.